You probably never realized it, but from the first Sarah Andersen comics to her latest book, 2024 brought the Sarah Scribbles comics full circle, and the webcomic will change forever after this. I interviewed Sarah Andersen, author of the webcomic Sarah Scribbles, and one question I did not ask her was, where do you get your ideas? Because all you have to do is look at her comics online. It's her life. Well, maybe not like Cryptid Club and Fangs by Sarah Andersen. Ask most comic artists where they get their ideas, and their answer is largely gonna be the same. Their conversations they have with family, their interactions they have with friends, it's all life experiences. Autobiographical. Well, an exaggerated autobiography. And really, no series embodies this sort of pseudo-autobiography style more than Sarah Scribbles. You can sum up, like, her Fangs graphic novel pretty easily, but not so much her flagship series. Most attempts to summarize the plot of these online comics break it down as Sarah Scribbles follows Andersen experiencing life as a millennial and focuses on themes such as adulthood and maturity. And more specifically, it focuses on the character Sarah navigating her 20s because, well, that's what real life Sarah was working through herself. Social anxiety, awkwardness, and other common mental health issues weren't discussed all that much in 2011. Sarah Scribbles was a way for Andersen to talk about those things and make it easier for others to not feel alone and embrace their own oddness. It makes sense why so many people latched onto her story. And I mean, after all, what newly 20-year-old person doesn't have an issue with growing up? Adulthood is a myth, as Andersen put it.
I don't think I'm the best necessarily illustrator or visual artist out there, but I do know that I have a connection with it to the point that even if it wasn't my career, I would still be doing it, like as a hobby. Talking to other people, I realized that for them, sometimes it's been like a journey to figure out what they even want to do. But for me, I always had a very strong connection to art and writing, and I was into comics and reading comics from a very early age. And I think that, that knowledge might have given me a little bit of a head start, so I just know that it's something very intrinsic in me.
But as she's gotten older and her challenges changed, so did Cartoon Sarah's. Her perspectives on life have shifted, leaving the next step of Sarah Scribbles something you won't see coming. Welcome to Zombie Comics. I'm your host, Aura.
Hi there, I'm Sarah Andersen, and I'm a cartoonist. I'm the author of Sarah Scribbles, Fangs, and Cryptid Club.
And this is the story of Sarah the millennial cartoon, and Sarah Andersen, the woman translating her real life into comic adventures. We appreciate any support you might want to give, a like, subscribe, or checking out Sarah Andersen's Patreon or merch shop, which I'll link below. Her comics have been some of the most shared and most recognizable internet cartoons since as far back as 2011. She's conquered countless websites, survived their rise and fall, and released award-winning book after award-winning book. You might not know her face in real life, partly because her Wikipedia photo is long outdated, but you know her work. She's far from the only cartoonist to use a simplistic black and white caricature of herself, but her wit and humor is second to none.
People are kind of duped sometimes by how simple the drawings are, and they don't see that the jokes often take me hours and hours. Like, I wish you could see my desk that I'm working on right now. I've got like 5 comics ripped out of a sketchbook that I'm shuffling between and trying to decide which punchline is funniest. Yeah, it's a very lengthy process, and it takes a lot of concentration, a lot of caffeine. I have to say I work really, really hard at those punchlines, and they don't always land, but I would say like 90% of the work of Sarah Scribbles is actually writing as opposed to drawing.
That's not to say her art hasn't come a long, long way from her early strips to her current day style. In high school, she was making comics in her sketchbook about teachers or about little things that happened in class. Andersen has been refining her drawings since she was a young girl.
I think I was probably doing the same as other kids, but my dad, he always pushed me. I have a lot of memories of us sitting together and, I'd draw like a hand and just draw like a circle and add some lines, and he'd be like, why don't you try like really drawing a hand. I have a distinct memory of drawing a face, I think when I was 5 or 6, and not understanding the structure of like a nose. And so I would keep just drawing a little circle. And I remember my dad sitting next to me and being like, that's not what a nose looks like. So it was like an early drawing lesson of just a face.
And her love for art only grew as she got older, eventually leading to her joining the online art community sometime around 2007 and 2008. Though she didn't jump right into comics. For the first few years, she was cooking up some spicy homemade memes.
You know, I would sometimes contribute kind of to like meme culture. I think there was like a drawing forum where people would just be posting memes and they were kind of like homemade. And I would sometimes draw stuff there. Or I was on, I believe they're called like paint chats a lot, just kind of interacting with my drawings. So before quote unquote Doodle Time started, or like 3-4 years, I had just casually kind of been in the online art world. And I had a DeviantArt too, but there was definitely no solid continuous thing. I was kind of just playing around with other internet people.
She would take the next step in her art career when she began attending the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2010, where she focused on illustration. Her studies hammered work ethic and deadlines into her, so she needed a side project, something to doodle to get her mind off things. Whatever her plans were going into college, they were about to drastically change. While bored at work during her sophomore year, she made a few comics with MS Paint. All that time sketching comics about her day-to-day life and making relatable memes, it all came together here. And on December 10th, 2011, she posted her first comic to Tumblr, titled The Art Critique, with the caption, "I decided to start posting comics I make about my life. Maybe other art students will relate to this." And this is where it all started. Sarah Scribbles. Sort of. When she first started, her comic series was instead called Doodle Time. Back then, her style was much rougher around the edges. There's something unsettling about seeing her character with such small eyes. But the humor was still on point and hilarious. Well, usually.
You know, at the beginning in 2011, the main platform for webcomics really was Tumblr. And the main kind of shtick was relatability. And in terms of humor, yeah, there's, you know, I look back at some of my old comics and I'm like, where is the punchline? You know, because a lot of them are just like talking about a day-to-day thing that happened to me. And back then that was enough because it was novel and new. It was not necessarily so much part of our culture. And I think we had a bit more access to audience. Before Tumblr, I think people were just kind of posting on their site, at least as I recall it, whereas Tumblr and other social media has sort of a built-in feature that allows things to really go viral and to spread. And I think I've really had to learn how to be more of an observational cartoonist. Like, I've had to learn to write about things other than myself and my feelings. And I've had to learn how to be clever and make a punchline that's unexpected, because there's personalities on the different platforms as well. I've noticed that too, where there's certain webcomics that I kind of only see on Reddit because they are catered to a Reddit audience. And then there's others like Tumblr, for example. I feel like my early comics really fit into Tumblr's kind of progressive, humorous personality, maybe. I still see it today where sometimes I'll have a comic go super viral on Facebook or something and flop elsewhere. And that just happens from time to time because the audiences are really different. And yeah, it's just another thing to navigate in the huge web of the internet.
Within a couple of comics, she knew she had something. These simple, relatable stories about her obstacles as an introverted millennial art student resonated with people. Doodle Time was basically the blueprints of what was to come. If not for Doodle Time's success, it might never have turned into the behemoth that is Sarah Scribbles. Her comic, Waking Up, is what she considers to be her first truly viral moment. All eyes were on her now. Some of her new watchers included larger blogs like Tastefully Offensive, But there was one other entity who took a particular interest in the growing webcomic, GoComics. GoComics was a website launched in 2005 by digital entertainment group Uclick, which in turn was founded in 1996 by Andrews McMeel, which is a detail Andersen knew well, thanks to their syndicate handling comic titles like Calvin and Hobbes. Actually, the entire reason Cartoon Sarah wears a striped shirt is because it's meant to be an homage to Calvin. By late 2013, the first half of Andersen's senior year at MICA, Doodle Time had been running for about 2 years. And that's when GoComics entered the picture with a promising offer. But with all the horror stories of artists getting taken advantage of, was their opportunity too good to be true?
It's very unfortunate. I was talking about this with someone who's newer in comics, is that what often happens is you start to kind of rise in the comics world. You think you're going to get all these great opportunities, but 90% of those opportunities and those emails you're getting are in some way kind of a swindle or a scam, people trying to take advantage of your work. And I'm not sure why that is. I think there's still a culture where artists and webcomic artists aren't as respected as they should be. And so we're still, I think, seen as people to take advantage of, and that's very unfortunate. So for younger artists out there, even if you get a contract early on, even if you don't have an agent, get a lawyer to read it over. I could go on for a long time about this, but there's certain things you want to always strike, like film and TV rights if you're just publishing a book or a game, etc. I mean, they'll sneak all kinds of stuff in there, and it's really unfortunate, and it's a big reason why working with my agent has been really important, because they teach you some of this stuff in art school, but it's such a wild and confusing world to navigate that I think a lot of artists really are, unfortunately, unprepared, and it makes me sad.
GoComics were offering Andersen comic syndication, but on one condition. The name Doodle Time, it had to go. Signing with any company means you're gonna have to follow more rules than you would as an independent artist. But Andersen really wanted that Andrews McMeel connection.
GoComics, as you probably know, is attached to Andrews McMeel Publishing. And Andrews McMeel Publishing at the time was like my star in the sky in terms of publisher, because they had published Calvin and Hobbes. And so I had the thought process of maybe if I work with them on GoComics and on the digital syndicate, that they will eventually give me a book deal. And that's actually exactly what happened. But it took a few years. I believe my first book with them came out 2016. So I remember I got an email from someone I still work with today. We probably signed the digital syndicate probably around late 2013, and then the book was out 2016. That was kind of my first professional anything.
In the end, signing that syndication deal with GoComics really paid off. Andrews McMeel Publishing went on to publish Adulthood is a Myth, Big Mushy Happy Lump, Herding Cats, Oddball. This signing really paid off for her in the long run. Although, that leaves us with a weird 2-year gap in the story between 2014 and 2016. After all, she would have just graduated, and postgraduate life has its own mountain of obstacles. And bills. That's why she was working in food service, more specifically as a barista. Sarah Scribbles was her second job that wasn't quite covering the groceries, and this pattern went on through 2014 and into 2015, when a new player entered the chat, CollegeHumor.
CollegeHumor will forever be very important in my story, because that's what enabled me to financially leave food service. So I was able to quit my barista job because of CollegeHumor. CollegeHumor reached out to me, and that allowed me to go full-time into webcomics, and I basically worked for CollegeHumor, and that was how I sustained myself until I got my first book deal. And I believe I was doing 2 articles a month, and then within each article I think there would be maybe 15 comics or something, and they were kind of Ali Brosh, like essay style. So I'd be writing and then put a comic, and then writing, put a comic. So those early articles, I'm sure if I go back I will cringe at them just because I can't look at my old stuff without cringing, as most artists do. But it was very, very pivotal for me because it gave me the ability to be doing art full time.
And when 2016 hit, it was off to the races. Adulthood is a Myth would release March 2016 and would win a Goodreads Choice Award. Big Mushy Happy Lump dropped in March 2017 and once more won the Goodreads Choice Award, followed by a third in a row win for Herding Cats in 2018. She guest illustrated an issue of the Invader Zim comic from Oni Press, a company I'm very familiar with. She was attending Comic-Cons, doing book tours, traveling the world. The cast of characters grew. We had Bun the Bunny, Uterus. Okay, so the cast of characters were never the main draw for the comic, but Sarah Andersen and her quirky millennial comic Sarah Scribbles were unstoppable. But by this point in the story, she had been doing the relatable humor comic for about 8 years. She was starting to feel an itch that she needed to branch out. July 2019 saw her collab with the novelist Andy Weir on the graphic novel Cheshire Crossing, which was based on an earlier comic by Weir following Wendy Darling from Peter Pan, Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz, and Alice Liddell from Alice Adventures in Wonderland, at a boarding school called Cheshire Crossing. It wasn't relatable humor or real-life shenanigans. Just like anyone, Andersen has a lot of interests, like the unsettling fantasy stories used in Cheshire Crossing. And cryptids. She really likes cryptids.
I remember there used to be these Bigfoot hunting or Loch Ness monster hunting or ghost hunting shows that I think would be on like the Discovery Channel. Those, I was really just enthralled with those shows as a kid. And I loved the idea that there could still be things out there that are hidden and unknown that we have to discover, which of course there are things that we have yet to discover, but the idea of something as exotic as a Mothman or a Bigfoot was just very enticing to me.
And by the end of 2019, everyone would know that. Because she was releasing a new webcomic, one vastly different from anything she had published before. A supernatural romance webcomic called Fangs. It follows Elsie the vampire, Fangs, get it? Age 300, having never met her match. That is, until a certain werewolf enters the picture. She uploaded the first episode of Fangs, Auditorium, on Halloween 2019. In the same vein, there was Cryptid Club, which released in 2022. During the 2020 lockdowns, everyone found themselves in a rough spot. So Andersen turned to something she held near and dear to her heart. Weird little spooky boys. Now, I don't mean to be dramatic, but this was a huge risk. There are countless examples of artists who fell off in popularity simply because they tried something new. Once you've been labeled something, like say the millennial cartoonist for a non-specific example, it can be hard to break out of that.
In general, I've always enjoyed the strange and the macabre, and that comes through, I think, even in Sarah Scribbles. I'll write about some of those subjects, and I'm currently on like an Eldritch God kick in Sarah Scribbles. I don't know if that'll still be going on by the time this interview comes out. But yeah, you know, like I said, early Sarah Scribbles was so much about myself, but I'm a person who's interested in a lot of things, and I get very into those things and very curious, and I love to research and read. And that's really where Cryptid Club came from. I did a lot of reading about the folklore and where the stories come from. And also with Fangs, you know, I've always loved vampire lore, and as a teenager I read Anne Rice's books, and I have a lot of pieces in my heart. I'm just fascinated by all kinds of stuff. And so Fangs and Cryptid Club really gave me that outlet. I'm working with subjects that I've always loved and that I can kind of take to the next level. And it's funny because I think Sarah Scribbles really taught me how to write. And so when I wanted to move away, I had learned how to write a joke and give characters some backstory and structure. And so when I was able to write about different things, my background really helped me create more cohesive pieces about them.
Andersen had been at the comic game for nearly a decade at this point. She was no longer the late teens, early 20s art student anymore. She needed room to express more of her interests, so she released Fangs as an online comic, and in September 2020, the following year, Fangs was published as a book, and it became Publishers Weekly bestseller of the month, then a New York Times bestseller in October. Safe to say, this venture had been a rousing success. And as a side note, both were nominated for Eisner Awards. Because that's the other side of things. Artists that do nothing but harp on the same old shtick they're known for, well, it's bound to get stale. And since Cartoon Sarah's stories often mimicked Andersen's life, things were bound to change eventually. That's why the 5th book in the Sarah Scribbles saga is so important. The cover is a play off of her first book, Adulthood is a Myth. But instead of rejecting adulthood, Cartoon Sarah is embracing it, writing that adulthood is a gift.
So the first book, the title is Adulthood is a Myth, and this one, which is going to be the 5th book, is Adulthood is a Gift. And you're so right that I was very much pigeonholed as a millennial cartoonist. And I think now that I'm 32 and people aren't talking so much about millennials anymore, they're like constantly dunking on Gen Z, I've really stepped into adulthood and reflecting on some of those early Sarah Scribbles comics. It's like I wrote a lot about just my day-to-day problems, and I realized I have solved a lot of those problems, and I've become a lot more of an observational cartoonist. And I'm really grateful to be 32. I'm an adult and I enjoy being an adult. I can't speak for an entire generation, but millennials were in a really weird position where a lot of things that were promised us simply did not come true. So we had to navigate adulthood in this very dramatically changing landscape and figure things out on our own. And at least for me, I've had to break preconceived ideas of what I should be. Talking about being a woman, there's this idea that you should be married and with children. And a lot of millennials have really, really grappled with that idea and thought about it. And when I look at what my life looks like, perhaps it was a confusing journey to get here, and at times very difficult, but I'm very, very grateful to be where I am. And so I wanted to shift the story from being this lost, confused early 20s person to a person now in my early 30s, being able to reflect on this new version of adulthood and actually celebrate it. And that's really the crux of the book.
It inevitably leads to the question of what's next for Sarah Scribbles. If Cartoon Sarah is the embodiment of real-life new adult Sarah, what happens when Andersen enters her 30s? Well, that's why Adulthood is a Gift is sort of like a finale to Sarah Scribbles, but with an asterisk.
I'm stepping away from Sarah Scribbles probably for a year or two come the new year. And I'm sort of at a place where, especially with Adulthood as a Gift and sort of wrapping things up with Sarah Scribbles, I feel like I've gone a bit from being just a webcomic artist. I don't mean to say just a webcomic artist. I feel like I've gone from being a webcomic artist to a full-fledged graphic novelist, and I feel like now it's in my toolkit. And as I was talking about earlier, I'm interested in so many things, and I have so many ideas. And I actually have 2 books that I'm working on that are on the back burner because I want to kind of round out Sarah Scribbles. So I actually plan on stepping away and working on some of these other projects, similarly to how I stepped away when I did Fangs and when I did Cryptid Club. And I don't really actually see a full end date to Sarah Scribbles. I feel like I'll probably always return because I really, it can be very challenging writing it, but I still feel drawn to it and enjoy it. So as I move through my 30s, I really have a lot of new projects. And yeah, that's basically the direction I'm headed. I don't want to say it's the end for Sarah Scribbles. It's just come the new year, I'll be stepping away and working on some new stuff.
In a way, Andersen views Sarah Scribbles as something much more personal and real. Yes, Cartoon Sarah is her, but it's a younger version of her. And while her chapter is closing, life continues forward for Andersen. even outside of the Sarah Scribbles series, there's countless other stories I didn't get into in this video. Like her time at the first ever webcomic-con, or how Andersen's comics were stolen and warped by the alt-right, or her involvement in the class action lawsuit against AI. But those stories are big enough all on their own. Andersen's life and career is full of those. I could do entire videos on the Fangs comics or Cryptid Club too. She's just accomplished so much, and it all comes back to Sarah's scribbles. So, with this soft finale to Cartoon Sarah's adventures, I personally can't wait to see what real life Sarah has in store. Obviously there are more stories here like I said, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to hear more about those in a future video. But for now, a huge thank you to Sarah Andersen for chatting with me today. Check out all of her books, her series, all that fun stuff. And until next time, I'll be reading my signed copy of Oddball. See ya!